So speaking of gold, Ben, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. So when I talk about the independent buyer versus large entities, um, that discussion, I always like to allude to David versus Goliath. And we took this quote from Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath, and it really highlights what David can do against the larger forces out there when acquiring a business. So the reason King Saul is skeptical of David's chances is that David is small and Goliath is large, right? And so Saul thinks of power in terms of physical might. In the business buying world, that translates to capital. Saul thinks so. He doesn't appreciate that power can come in other forms as well. And so that's where you, as your independent buyer, that's where your strategic advantage is in breaking rules, in substituting speed and surprise for strength. So that's what we're going to get into later on in the discussion, and how you can use those to your advantages, whereas this large strategic and private equity groups, they might not have that power.
Yeah, and these guiding principles, a lot of buying businesses is establishing a clear framework. And I talk about this all the time. It's what does your business buy box look like? What kind of framework of what a business you'd like to purchase looks like? So all of these sort of frameworks help you better navigate a lot of the noise around what is buying a business.
So in the David and Goliath story, David goes up against a large opponent who has formidable strength against David's average humanly strength. In the business buying world, you as an independent buyer, you're David. Okay, your competitors are well capitalized, they have more resources, and almost always they'll be able to outbid you. You cannot match them on a capital level, but you can match them on forces that they're not able to do, and that is using being likable and being human and getting the seller to like you and choose you when they have the options of more money or more resources with strategics or private equity firms.
Yeah, so if you sit today as a buyer, let us know in the chat, like how confident are you today? One being I'm ready, I'm ready to take on Goliath. Two being, I'm not there yet. I'd love to hear some thoughts in the chat. So first and foremost, do you have the capital and can you prove it? Um, To be taken seriously in small business acquisitions, you need to provide proof of capital, regardless of deal size. Um, so Ben, when you think about capital in deals, what does that look like?
Yeah, the great question. With DealMemo, most of our clients, I would say 95%, are sell-side advisors. And so we are constantly talking to our clients on positioning the businesses that we work on for their ideal acquirers. Now, our clients are always saying, independent buyers are difficult to deal with. Why? Because they often either don't have the capital upfront, or they cannot provide the proof of capital, or they're slow to provide them. Whereas private equity firms, strategic firms, much larger, they know that they have the capital and they're just easier to work with throughout the deal process. So capital, um, it's really important. You're buying a business, right? And if you don't have the capital for a specific type of business, it doesn't make sense to waste everyone's time in the deal, um, feigning that you do have the capital only to come to the closing table and then try to close, um, you know, for funds that are below um, what you have. That's why it's important to build good rapport, to have a final, threshold and say, all right, I cannot exceed this amount of capital. And that's where we come in with the buy box. So you've determined your upper threshold, you're out in the search, and you're saying, all right, I'm just going to go for acquisitions that are below this threshold. And then you make everyone else's life easier. So you make advisors' lives easier, the sellers' lives easier. And if you come across as somebody who's honest, who provides that capital up front and that funding capability up front, regardless of deal size, because I know, smaller deal sizes sometimes, independent sponsors might say, why do I need to provide the proof of capital for this? Well, it's just a matter of respecting the advisor and also the seller, because they're not sure what funds you have, and they don't want to deal with a tire kicker. So it's just a matter of making the deal process smoother and providing your requirements upfront, as far as capital goes.
Yeah, and I certainly agree. Ben, one person saying you're sounding a little bit muffled. You sound okay on my end. Just wanted to make sure everyone can hear all of us today.
I'll try to shield my mic in case there's some echo.
You sound loud and clear on my end, but I want to make sure everyone gets all these nuggets. So understanding your competition, you cannot compete on price or industry experience, but you can compete on intangibles, as I like to call it. If you're a solo buyer, you will never be able to, typically you won't be able to outbid a private equity or enterprise buyer. Case in point, they have funds, they have the ability to pay higher EBITDA multiples, and that translates to cash. But the sellers are becoming aware of some of the challenges with working with these types of buyers. So really, what can you do to set yourself apart? Some of the things include, searching for businesses below that bottom threshold for larger buyers. Typically, 1 million of EBITDA. I spent about a decade in private equity. A lot of private equity buyers have a hard stop of 3 million of EBITDA. But that being said, in this new world of SMB acquisitions, they're beginning to come down market, but looking for these smaller, very profitable businesses may give yourself a leg up. This is one I really wanted to highlight is use speed to your advantage. In private equity and strategic buyers, they have many layers. I like to call it gatekeeping of things that just delay the process. If you're a solo searcher, you can make very fluid, rapid decisions almost on like an hourly, a minute by minute basis. So reply to those emails, offer willingness to get on the phone and text, offer up speaking on the weekends. Like if you're really committed to looking and buying a business, you need to work outside of a small business owner's working hours. Another nugget and tip I will give to prospective searchers is offer to talk to them on Friday afternoons. Business owners, I've found, love to talk about how great their business is performing on Friday afternoons. It makes them feel good heading into the weekend about, it's just a feel good. Don't try to contact business owners on Monday mornings. These business owners are very busy, myself and Ben as fellow business owners as well. It's going to be hard to get us on the phone on Monday because we're planning our team and organizing our week accordingly. So these are some intangibles. Ben, what are some other takeaways from this?
Those are great points, Patrick. Especially I like the Friday afternoon one, because also what I found in sales is having sales calls on Thursdays or Friday mornings. Everyone's in a better mood, so the result of that sales call actually performs better than having them on Mondays. So I'll never have a sales call on Monday. But to your point, understand if the seller, you have to understand what the seller is looking for, and that takes a little bit of time. You might not get that on the first discussion, but it's, speed gets you there. So you have to build extreme rapport with the seller. Get them to like you. Be human, be likable, chat about their favorite topics, do your research, understand what the seller is motivated by. Oftentimes they'll, you might think they're motivated by the highest possible purchase price, but a retiring seller may not want to stay on with a private equity firm held business for 2, 3 more years and be under scrutiny of a board, right? They might prefer to sell at a lower price to an independent sponsor who they know will then preserve the legacy of their business. And by understanding truly what their motivations are, and also truly what the reason for sale is, you can then use that as leverage to build rapport with the seller and ultimately get them to like you and choose you. Um, it's not always about what the advisor wants in the transaction. It's ultimately the seller will say yes or no to a potential acquirer, and oftentimes they say no to the larger ones simply because they like the smaller, more personable seller buyer, the independent sponsor.
Yeah, I completely agree. Another final nugget for understanding the competition is if you're have a specific criteria of a certain business or industry you want to purchase, make the commitment to become almost like an expert. You need to be able to talk the lingo, understand the understand some of the pain points of these business owners. Um, the quote like niche down is very true in many aspects, especially in business acquisitions. It's often not helpful if you're a generalist. While you can approach yourself as I want to buy any business, showing that you understand the industry and can take the reins as this new operator gives confidence for these sellers that you're the guy. Um, if you are lacking confidence or not, or showing you don't really understand the industry, that's going to come off immediately in the first 30 seconds if you start talking to these legacy owners. Um, Understanding a little bit of the lingo, enough to be dangerous, as I call it, will give them enough confidence to at least have a second and third conversation. These business transactions are very relationship based, and they are qualitative rather than quantitative. Yes, there is there's dollars at stake and there's a lot of numbers to digest, but deals get closed based on human to human relationships and trust rather than simply purchase price.
Yep, yep. And we're fortunate that we live in a time period where a lot of private equity firms, they don't have such a good reputation. So that plays into your favor as an independent sponsor because sellers hear often from their peers in the industry that somebody might have sold to a private equity firm and now they're constantly they're still working 40 hours a week, and even though they had a pretty sizable payout, their life has not gotten any better in terms of work hours, right? They still have to stay on. Or the private equity firms might have some kind of unreasonable expectation or something along those lines. So, as an independent sponsor, you're fortunate that your competition is not very well liked among business sellers, and then also strategics. Sometimes they just don't want to sell to competitors either due to some kind of grudge or rivalry, or they don't want to risk divulging information to a competitor who never even had an intention of acquiring the business in the first place.
Yeah, and it speaks to the trust in these transactions. Understanding and being empathetic from the seller's standpoint is often very important. A lot of these legacy sellers and business owners, they may know a lot about their business, but they may not know a lot about how to sell their business or what the process looks like. So I always encourage you to educate and walk them through here's the process, here's what it looks like if you do get further along in your business search process. Because if they begin to question why things are happening, it might start to lack uh, the trust category. And that's quick ways deals often die. Just things to kind of think about as you kind of go through this business journey. So, your biggest weapon, lean into being likable personable, prepared, and creative. This is the differentiate. This is what separates you from everyone else. Connecting with them on a human level. Use this to your advantage. You won't be able to bring enough cash to the table rather than a large private equity fund, but a lot of these owners care about legacy, and they want to know that someone they know specifically is taking over the reins. That's an advantage you as a solo buyer has that private equity and strategics don't. They're being bought by an entity being led today by a certain individual, but as any other corporate entity goes, there's no guarantee that person's going to be owning and operating their business specifically. And I've spoken with dozens, if not hundreds of sellers who have sold to private equity, and this is a challenge. They often will speak to not knowing all the parties, or people are changing constantly during those who worked on the transaction versus the operational people after close. You as a buyer can set yourself apart and say, look, I plan to run this as a primary owner and operator. Here's why you should trust me. Here's some intangibles I bring: leadership, management experience, industry experience, perhaps. And more often than not, if you speak to wanting to continue their legacy and have growth for their employees, this is the biggest weapon. And this is the intangibles that allow you to get your letter of intent or LOI signed and beat out larger private equity buyers. Any other takeaways, Ben?
Just one thing here, a few bullet points are listed as to why an independent sponsor would likely be invited to purchase a business. If the business is obviously large or very large, then it will likely go through a formal process, and then it's private equity or strategic territory. The smaller businesses are, again, really where the independent sponsor has an advantage. Below $1 million EBITDA is where I would suggest, just right below, let's say around 900,000 EBITDA, right? You have enough of a business to reinvest capital to be able to grow that business to that 3 million threshold and then sell to private equity. So you're operating in that great area where it's still too small for private equity firms or strategics, but it's also too large for, well, I don't want to say too large. It's large enough that it's not like a small mom and pop business, right? So that's where you have the most opportunity for value creation, because that's what it comes down to: is what value are you going to put into the business? How are you going to grow it? And are you going to hold it, or are you going to exit? I mean, this is a model that the larger players do all the time. Private equity firms come down market, buy a business, or add it on to an existing platform, add value, grow it, sell it to a larger private equity firm or strategic. And they keep doing it on and on and on. Strategics do the same thing. And as the business grows, it either becomes more and gobbles up more smaller businesses to a point where it'll go public, or it might experience a downturn and then get divested to another firm and change hands again. But where you really have that value is at the small portion of the market, because the M&A engine, as I like to call it, needs independent sponsors, because it needs independent sponsors to take those small businesses, grow them, and then get them acquired by the private equity and the strategics. So independent sponsors are very much necessary in the greater ecosystem of M&A, but towards the bottom of the market, to bring up those smaller companies towards the middle.
Yeah, and I love that word, M&A engine. And it's so true, because there is a gap between businesses that may have 500,000 EBITDA, 750 EBITDA, even $1 million or $1.5 million of EBITDA. They're often too small for private equity to buy, and they're too big for traditional ETA or SBA loan businesses to purchase. So there's that weird sweet spot, which is really what created this independent sponsor model. So I completely agree with a lot of some of the things you say. One question from someone in the audience for you, Ben, they said, how much are you interacting, if I'm a buyer, how much are you interacting with the sellers directly? If you go through a business broker, are you able to reach out to the sellers and have these discussions? What would you say?
Good question. So there are two schools of thought, and it's if you are on the sell side, so if you are a seller, you almost always want to run a formal process and not speak to one individual buyer. If you are on the buy side, you almost never want to be in a formal process and always want to speak directly to the seller, and avoid that bidding process. And that's just the nature of the business or in general. But as a buyer, your best bet is contacting sellers or potential sellers, soon to be retiring sellers prior to the sale of the business. Because if you are contacting them, after they've decided to sell and after they've hired an advisor, everything has to be done through the advisor. And for you to get past the advisor to speak with a seller, you need to, provide proof of capital. You need to, go through whatever the advisor requests, because the advisor has the right to screen potential buyers for his client or her client. So my recommendation is if you don't want to deal with advisors, go after businesses that are not listed for sale, but may be soon listed for sale because the seller is in that retirement age. It might be in a year, it might be in a two years that they're looking to sell, but at least you're building rapport early on. If you are, contacting or dealing with an advisor, the best thing you can do, respond with extreme speed or follow up with consistency. Be likable. Like do the things that you would do. And I like to use this analogy. If you were, courting a potential, partner for, a girlfriend, boyfriend, because it's pretty much the same thing. It's like dating, and you want to show the other person you're interested and you're attentive and wow, you got them flowers. I'm not saying go buy the advisor flowers, but you know show that you're top of mind always, and that's where being creative comes into play. um you know there's a sales tactic. You can show up to a place with pizza or donuts and throw like a little donut party, right? That's like that's something that somebody remembers. So, offer to have coffee with the advisor, um, you know, buy them lunch or something, just something to make you memorable. And based on what Patrick said before, it really is a relationship business. So you have to put in the hours of building and cultivating those relationships because ultimately they will pay off, and that advisor will remember you when something matches your criteria. They'll say, "Hey, I'll contact you first. That guy bought me lunch, or that woman bought me coffee." Perfect example, and that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, all great points and great nuggets. So if you're, new to the space, hopefully you're writing these things down. The overarching theme is just be likable, and very responsive, and offer your time up. Don't gatekeep your time initially. Obviously, everyone's time is important, but you do need to go through the process initially.
One thing I'll add, advisors are incentivized to find the best buyer and also, close deals rather quickly. So if you as a buyer are always responding with extreme speed, right? You're picking up those phone calls, you're texting quickly, you're emailing back quickly. Let's say the advisor asks you for proof of financials, boom, they're ready. You send them already, within an hour. This shows the advisor and also the seller that you're serious, and also shows them that you're easy to deal with. So they'd rather get you to the table first before waiting for 3 to 5 business days to get a response from, a private equity buyer, right? They know that you are there and attentive and responding.
Yeah, absolutely. So this speaks to, find your own fishing pond. Search and this really is, there's another quote very similar. It's by Wayne Gretzky. It says, "Don't go where the puck is, go where you think the puck is going to go." There are many ways to kind of cut this up in small business world. The point of it is find your own fishing pond and go where industries relate to you. Don't follow the latest trend because very often that trend will change. And I've been in acquisitions for over a decade, and it seems like every year there's a new hot industry or space. Right now, the home services space is very popular. Additionally, things like HVAC, roofing, landscaping, these are very, it fits the mantra of sexy, boring businesses. Just because a large buyer pool is pursuing those does not mean they're great businesses by any means. They are just widely publicized across social media and discussed on podcasts. An example of, I call it the zigzag. If you're zagging, a zag industry would be software. In 2021, 2020, 2019, software was the hot industry. Everyone wanted a SaaS business. Now, I only do a handful of SaaS deals per year. I'm not sure what Ben's kind of owner mix looks like, but the point of this is establish your personal business buy box, and regardless of what that looks like or who is pursuing it, very often, if you go against the grain, that's where these great businesses are. Additionally, if you can leverage these off-market deals, which are not represented by brokers, that's where the true arbitrage comes in, where you can get great businesses at a very attractive price.
Yeah, well said, Patrick. When you're fishing in a pond with other fishermen, they're less quality or bigger fish to catch. So you want to find the areas of where you are at a competitive advantage. And oftentimes that's actually within your immediate local geography because you know those businesses, you frequent them, you live in the same towns as those sellers. Let's say you have a manufacturing business within maybe 10, 15 miles of your town. It's easy to stop by there and just chat up the seller. It's easy to understand, or meet the seller for beer or lunch or something. That's where you have the advantage because you're directly there in person. And that's where I would start personally, because it's much easier to acquire a business in your local area. Number one, you live there. Number two, you know a lot of the neighbors and the people and the businesses. Three, you don't have to move your entire family across country because you bought, some roofing business. So you are at an advantage in that case. So that's where I would start. But if your criteria is larger, then I would just go out from there geographically at least. It's also, much easier to acquire something closer to you, so you don't have to again, uproot your entire lifestyle just to move somewhere else and fit that business.
Yeah, and starting locally, speaking to people in your township really adds a lot of differentiation. You never know who's thinking about selling their business. You could be going to a business or use a home service company in your town, and the owner's been trying to sell it for years and has just been thinking about it, but actually hasn't taken it seriously. So don't be afraid to be loud about your intention to purchase a business because you never know what friend of a friend will make that introduction. A closing example I've seen frequently, looping back to the business brokers, is when you do speak to these business brokers, they represent a wide variety of deals. So if this particular deal they're representing may be overpriced in your opinion or not a good fit, maintaining that relationship is often best practice because I've seen several buyers who have purchased businesses 12 months later from the same broker representing a new company, which fits their buy box. And the reason they won the listing and had an accepted letter of intent was because that business broker thought of them because they had a good relationship and they were a nice, likable person, and they reached out and called them. So you never know how you're going to find these business listings or great deals that fit your buy box. So keep that in mind as you do speak to tons of individuals.
And one thing I'll add also is, let's say you live in a specific geographic location, and let's say it's even a bigger city. Find the most active brokers or advisors in that area and send them, a box of chocolate or some gifts or something, or grab coffee with them if you can get them. They're busy, but if you can get them to do so, that's great. Do that before without expecting anything in return. Basically, show value beforehand, and then that will get you on their kind of good side, and hopefully you'll get more deal flow or preferred deal flow, as time goes by and as you build that relationship.
Yeah. So just as a reminder, if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. If there's like a burning question about buying businesses, Ben and I are here to answer as needed. So don't be shy. Throw your questions in the Q&A as we kind of dive through these topics. So we've set the stage. We've understood, how you kind of think about these businesses, but like, how do you prepare? Presentation matters. Similar to dating, you're courting your potential partner. How do you, Ben, when you think about how to better present yourself, what does that look like?
So think about what the competition is doing. Private equity firms, strategics, they have these well put together websites, presentations, decks. They're just overall well polished, right? And you, as an independent sponsor, should be definitely doing the same thing. You should have a very polished website. You should have a one pager, and I recommend this to everyone on the buy side. Always have a one pager. Could also be 2 pages, but highlighting your criteria, highlighting the value that you bring, highlighting your background. An email domain that matches, your website, your brand. So you're basically operating like a business. Think about how you would feel if you were selling a business or you were purchasing a service from somebody else. What makes you go with one brand versus another? Well, the one brand might have a very uniform presentation. They might respond to you like that. They might, let's say it's a roofing company, right? You want to replace your roof. They might respond to your inquiry immediately. They might have an awesome website and an email domain. Everything is cohesive. So wow, this is a professional, presentable business. You have to be operating and presenting yourself exactly the same way. Speed of response, again, and consistency. I can't emphasize enough how important speed is in the process. Be the first to always respond, and send those one pagers, to the seller or to the advisor, because that gives them the ability to then quickly analyze and say, okay, I know what this sponsor is looking for. This is a great match. They have the capital, they have the background, and so on. I have their contact information. This is their website. Looks beautiful. And the consistency, follow up if you don't get a response. Don't be discouraged just because an advisor didn't respond to you. Oftentimes our clients tell us after they launch a business, they get like hundreds of LOIs, IOIs sometimes, indications of interest, and then those get whittled down, right? As buyers get the SIMs, and then they review them and they might pull out. But don't get discouraged. Be consistent in your follow up. Be courteous in your follow up. And just have an overall presentable profile. Oh, and one thing, tailor the one pager to the business that you're trying to acquire. So I wouldn't send out a generic one, but I would, have one section and then tailor the business. Think about it like applying for a job. You don't send out a general resume. It's better to tailor the resume to the job, to the position. It's the same thing. So tailor why your profile in your one pager is the right fit for the business that you're trying to acquire.
Yes. Again, move away from being the generalist and niche down and speak directly to who you want to get through: the owner, the broker, the gatekeeper. Speak directly to them and good things will happen.
Yeah, and then also get to know the seller. So once you get to that position of being able to communicate with the seller directly, either after going through an advisor screening or talking to the seller directly initially if they don't have an advisor, do your research. What does the seller like? Speak to them, or maybe you see their profile on Facebook or something and they're golfing, right? Uh, Understand what the seller likes, understand what they don't like, work that into the conversation. That's what it means to be likable and approachable, and um, you know, share those same likes or dislikes. If the seller again likes golf, right, can, I don't know, treat the seller to a beer to watch the golf game, or a new set of clubs or something. It is a relationship business, and these are relationship building activities that will pay off in the long term if you're dedicated to the search. And this is where again you have to be creative. You can also be honest to the seller and be straight up and say, hey, listen, I really like your business. What would it take for a buyer like me, that's an independent, to come in and just buy the business and continue your legacy? I'm sure that the seller will tell you honestly, hey, this is what I'm expecting. I want them to take care of my employees and so on. So, it doesn't hurt to just be honest and ask straight up, what would it take?
Yeah, clear and concise in small business acquisitions is always, in my opinion, best practice. Keep it simple. Another way you can separate yourself from private equity is avoid the fancy jargon. Just keep it simple and break it down in simple terms. While some sellers may know what EBITDA is, there's plenty of others who don't. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's a separate conversation. Your only objective when you're trying to connect with sellers is to be likable and explain the process to build that trust engine. You know, the more trust you can earn, the better they'll remember you and give you a chance. While buyers have the advantage of their, they're the ones that can give the seller a liquidity event and maybe their retirement. These things are relationships, and they need to choose you. So that's kind of where this all comes down to: is present yourself, um, speed of response, likability, and be consistent. So now is your chance. As we said, that you've heard about the silver tsunami, but this is the unique opportunity to capitalize on this uncertainty. What are some other opportunities you see, Ben?
Yeah, so we're in a interesting time period right now where, we have tariffs, right? And that's affecting certain industries dramatically, and it's creating a lot of economic uncertainty. This is good for smaller buyers. Why? Larger buyers, strategics, private equity firms are holding off on acquisitions. Their, deals in the upper middle market or middle market have dwindled quite a bit, at least from my sources. Patrick, I don't know if you've heard or seen the same, but they're holding off. They're waiting for some kind of more steady direction before they continue with their acquisitions. And this is what this picture is explaining. The large private equity buyer, um, it's similar to like a dragon in a cave guarding gold. Um, they're sleeping. So it's your chance now to come in, and sellers still want to sell. And we've actually seen from our side, since we're plugged into the sell side, many of our clients, the sell side advisors, have actually seen an uptick in sellers that want to sell, because those sellers don't want to weather another economic downturn. They're nearing retirement and they have, 3 years or more of historical growth to show. So it's better for them to sell now, and uncertainty is pushing them towards selling sooner. So you're having a lot more sellers on the market. You're having a lot less buyers, at least the larger ones. So that's why for you as an independent buyer, now is your chance really to be more aggressive in your search, to get quality businesses that would normally be gobbled up by larger buyers, and at potentially lower multiples, unless you're obviously in one of the very hot industries that we mentioned before. Um, but I would stay out of those. I would go after uh, businesses that are in maybe not tariff affected businesses, but businesses that are less competitive in less competitive in industries, and ones that you might find because sellers are motivated to sell. So again, great window of opportunity that you should capitalize on.
Yeah, and there's always, especially in M&A, it's a long lead cycle and it's a long process. Typically it's 90 to 120 days of exclusivity often. And some searchers may be looking to buy businesses for 1, 2 years. So buying a business is a marathon, not a sprint, but adding in those sense of urgency and timely responses and speed does set yourself apart. But given it takes months, if not a year or two to buy a business, you need to be consistent and thoughtful in what you do. I agree with what Ben's point. What I'm seeing in the market is larger funds. Is uncertainty. Think about just what 2025 presented us. There was the Doge with the government contracting space effectively being disrupted for the first time ever, in terms of the number of contracts being canceled, jobs terminated, etc. So there's much less government contracting activity than I typically see. And then we were hit with tariffs, significant tariffs, which impact several, tons of businesses and industries. Larger capital groups, they don't like uncertainty. They certainly have to deploy capital where needed, but there is a lot of moving pieces that many capital groups are being very hyper selective, which gives you an advantage. Once things settle down, which I'm already starting to see a little bit of settling down, given the Doge impact has sort of sustained itself, and we'll see where tariffs go. The funds will flip the switch on and begin to deploy and be more aggressive. And then it's an avalanche effect. When one fund hears about another fund being aggressive, they all will start. It's a copycat league. You can say that for a variety of professionals and industries. So now, in my opinion, is a great time to buy businesses. I close deals all the time, even in these uncertain environments. So a few more things, and I always like to show this kind of graphic. This is an actionable piece that you can take if you're actively searching or new to the space. This is kind of like your timeline, and this is specifically to buyers, but this is also could be helpful to some sellers. Once you do have that signed letter of intent, here is a process. So if you want to take a picture of this or save this to your desktop, this is what it looks like on a number of days between when you sign your LOI and actually close the business. Typically, it takes anywhere from 60 to 120 days. And these are some of the parties and processes you're going to have to engage to actually close on these businesses. So you'll have things like financial diligence. You're going to go through a formal bank and underwriting process. You're going to do legal due diligence, things that an M&A attorney will draft your purchase agreement. Ben can speak to that, having worked with primarily sellers. This is where the legal ramifications come into place if there are issues around the transaction. So bookmark, this timeline and, keep it as you kind of go through this journey.
I like this graphic.
Yeah, I use this and will show my clients on a daily basis because it does break down the number of days and who needs to be involved. If you're a business searcher, you're the quarterback, for those football fans out there. These providers are your team, but ultimately you're the driver of this whole narrative. So you need to understand the big picture on how you go from prospective business and searcher to new business owner.